Okay, we've got Briar Grace-Smith, and we've got Ainsley
Yes.
Gardiner. Yes, the
Yeah.
co-directors of Cousins, this beautiful new film from New Zealand about, and I want to give each of you the opportunity to describe the film in one word.
Connection. Family.
Well done.
Pride.
That's 10 out of 10. Okay, give us give us just a very brief, in your own words, give us the outline of the story of Cousins.
You, me. You. Okay. So, cousins, the story of three cousins who only spend a summer together as children, and the film follows them once one of the cousins is taken away by the state. And it just follows their lives. They're three very different young women who go on to lead very different lives, but it's about the impact on their lives of the loss of the cousin and the search for her over a lifetime, essentially.
What were the chief themes that you wanted to explore in this film? You mentioned connection, you mentioned family. Can you just unpack that a little bit for us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's the essentially the film is a film about the impacts of colonization at a kind of political level. It's about the things that are lost. It's about loss of language, loss of culture, and ultimately the loss of a family member. And it's about how the things that are strong in this family and in this community, their connection to one another, their connection to their land, um, sustain them through all of those losses, and about how their love for their cousin and their connection to their cousin kind of drives their choices and their decisions through their lifetime.
Yeah, I think it's about the importance of community as well. Like, if you think about the image of the homeless woman on the street, and to me that sparks a whole lot of things. It means that we've become, in a way, dislocated from each other, and it's about the importance of listening and supporting, and I guess helping each other out. We need our communities as human beings.
I'm very keen to just explore the style of direction of the film because I'm going to be absolutely honest with you. You mentioned colonization there and cultural dislocation and all that sort of thing. I found this film so moving because of the personal story and because of the performances in the film. There's discussion of politics in the film, and of course, there's the cultural aspect that you're very sensitive to. The focus of the film, though, is the journey of Mata, which is told in a non linear fashion in flashback. And it is just such a beautifully nuanced, moving story. I want to know from both of you how conscious you were to keep focus on the personal story and I guess to not let it be overwhelmed by politics or cultural observation. That the focus is on her and on her relationship with the girls. All that other stuff informs the story, but it's her journey that really is the priority. Can you just tell me a little bit about that? Whether that was a conscious thing that you did from the get go, or whether you had to really kind of adjust the settings to make sure that her story got priority.
It was a conscious thing. So right from the get-go, and also in the novel, the main focus is really all about that character Mata. but also there is that bigger world at play, you know, the reasons that she's on the street, which involved, you know, a history. There's all that history that has happened before her that's contributed to her situation. So the juggle came with actually trying to, at sometimes where we felt it was important to bring in those wider political issues. So yeah, it was always clearly Mata's journey.
And I think because the novel, Patricia is amazing at telling stories that are very intimate, very much about characters and family and relationships. And she always has this the world obviously is the wallpaper to that. And so that is the kind of juggle, is, as you say, how to focus on the journey. And I think the awesome thing for both Briar and I is that we did have amazing actors. We had an amazing crew, so we didn't have to actually think about how we were going to shoot it, although we did all of those things. What we were able to focus on was just moment to moment, getting connected performances. But the stuff that you sort of talk about is the external stuff, as Briar is saying. I think that's what drives some of the amazing performances. When Tania Heke, who plays the oldest Mata, came into the room to audition, she burst into tears before she even auditioned, because she was so, not only does she have the themes of this story in her own life directly, she was just so moved because of her the sadness that she felt for those Maori women who are homeless on the street. So actually it's our connectedness to all of those other things that allow us to deliver, I think, both as directors and actors, quite powerful and nuanced moments, because each of the moments is kind of full of all of that other stuff, of the power of all of that stuff.
What about all the use of close-ups of faces? In a way, this film is a story of faces, and you can see the story in the faces, not just of the main characters, but of supporting characters as well. Are you guys Ingmar Bergman fans or something? Can you just tell me a bit about...
Yeah, no. Well, yes, but no, that's not the point. I think, I think one of the things is, Jim, we're going to keep coming back to these kind of bigger themes of cultural and political stuff, because it's just it drives us, and we get so used to seeing ourselves as Maori women portrayed in a particular way. And we love our aunties and our nannies. And when we look at their faces, we find them glorious. And so when you're in a room with all of these beautiful women, particularly, you don't want to be anywhere other than, looking them in the eye and looking at their beautiful skin and, exploring their faces. So it's I think in terms of a filmmaking style, it's that thing that you say about the intimate nature of character, is that we actually want to be as close to these women as possible because we love and care for them. So it's sort of just a natural intimacy and care that's at play there, I think. I was going to say as well, our director of photography, he's a young Maori man. This is his first feature film. And we certainly talked all of that stuff out, and we were very much engaged in the idea of being, very close. But we could just rely on him to, find the most beautiful shots, and he did.
We also, I think, something that could have inspired that choice in part was when we were casting and thinking about our cast, we were working in a room, and we had a huge wall that we put images up of the people we were thinking might fit these various roles. And so we'd walk in every day, and there was a wall full of faces, close-ups of Maori women. So I'm sure somehow that it was quite moving, and I'm sure somehow that seeped into the style we chose to take on.
Did you guys find yourselves going for the less is more school of performance? Is that what you were going for? That you really wanted to keep it minimalist, to really let the faces tell the story, to let the nuance tell the story?
Yeah. We wanted to keep it, I guess, as authentic as we could, and we were working often with community and with I don't know if this is to do with it, but with not with it without with non-actors. Is that what you call it?
Yeah, a lot of non-actors.
A lot of non-actors. And so, you know, in an effort also to make them feel a sense of ownership and relaxed in what they were doing, there was a kind of encouragement on set for people to be themselves and to take ownership of those moments in the film. And so a lot of that is, you know, we would, in those community scenes, was working with the local woman and saying, this is the intention of this scene, what would you say? And so some of the words that they speak are words that they came up with.
And I think there's a naturalistic thing. So I reckon that one of the things we did in the casting, and particularly when you're casting kids, is kids can't act. Kids can only really be themselves. And we sort of took that approach with our adult actors as well. The various ages of the actors didn't get much of a chance to meet. They didn't really have the opportunity to rehearse together. The kids we certainly rehearsed together, and the two adult cousins who spent time together, we wanted them to have a real connection. But I think we wanted to take a naturalistic approach, which was that these actors, without trying to affect some sort of performance or collectively give the character something, overlay something on the character in order to make the character seamless or whatever. We just wanted them to bring quite a naturalistic performance, to bring, you know, I think that was a point of difference, is that we weren't trying to create a character. We were trying to bring out what was naturally in each of these women, whether they were actors or non-actors.
You really invest a lot of story, even to minor characters. If I can just bring up the mother, the foster mother, or is it Mrs. Robinson?
It's Parkinson.
Mrs. Parkinson.
Oh, yeah.
What's the name of the actress who played her? Was it Sylvia Rands?
And yeah,
Sylvia Rands plays Marta's mother, or supposed mother.
Yeah.
Okay. So Sylvia Rands plays the mother. Even though it's a supporting role, she doesn't come across as an evil character or even as a villain. Okay. You really feel sorry for her. You get a sense of she has some sad backstory, and you do give that character this space to actually have her own story. Tell me a bit about the approach just to that character as an example of your general approach.
Yeah, it's interesting because I was going to mention Mrs. Parkinson as a way that Briar and I were also quite playful with the way we directed character, because Mrs. Parkinson is a little bit larger than life, and I think that we do play with her as a slightly as I say, larger than life character with a bit more affectation and stuff. But we were certainly really mindful of the fact that it's an easy way out to turn her into the villain, and that for an audience, you actually, this is a story about humanity and connection. And Mrs. Parkinson is also longing for exactly the same thing. And she's just a product of her times. And as you say, we had an imagination of her as a woman who had her own backstory and her own sorrow and pain and trauma, and that there is a reason people are the way that they are on both sides of the fence. So it's great that you found her to be a sympathetic character, because we worked really hard to do that. And as I say, the book was a touchstone, and Patricia's book gives the time and space to each of the characters in the same way. So we certainly wanted to make sure that anyone who was in the film was sort of given the opportunity to be a full character.
And that character too, she worked out a backstory for herself. We sat down and she worked out a backstory. So we don't have time to, and it's too much of a sidetrack to give that to the audience. But she knew she carried that backstory in her relationship with Mata, and I think that's what you can see and what she wears.
Well,
and it's a sad backstory.
Yeah, she carries that backstory in her face. And again, I've got to commend you guys for how this film looks. How informed were you with the way it looked and the way it was cut?
Yeah, we had a lot of prep. That was one big thing. We initially had 2 DOPs because we were really making an effort to sort of flatten out the hierarchical structure that we've been, handed over by Hollywood, and we're trying to embody something a bit more kind of that was representative of what we see as indigenous storytelling. So we had 2 DOPs, but one of them, unfortunately, he was a Torres Strait Islander. His father became ill, and just right at the sort of last minute he had to go. So because we had 2 DOPs, we had spent a lot of time together working through the vision, working through how we would work together so that we would create this seamless vision together. And so we had spent a lot of time talking. One of the things I guess I do as a producer, which I bought into this for myself as a director, is because all New Zealand films are low budget films, you kind of have to elect 5 moments in the film that you want to achieve in as perfect a form as you can, because every other scene is going to be a massive compromise. And so, we had those moments where we needed it to be just so to achieve both the look and style that we were after. Briar as well, like on the flip side of that, Briar is an incredibly kind of impulsive, instinctual person. So she would come up with these wild ideas that none of us
could understand.
We had no idea what she was up to, and we just sort of had to go with it. And we were doing this thing in the bush, and the DOP and I looking at each other going, yeah, no idea. But eventually it starts to come into fruition, so having the respect and patience and time with each other. But ultimately, as I said, once we had all of that prep, and once we started to see what Ray was capable of as a shooter, he was our DOP and operator, is that we just had the confidence to, for the most part, from time to time, there would be things like, no, we have to get this moment in this way, or we have to try and understand what Briar's doing here.
Briar, I'd like you to just, because you've mentioned the novel a couple of times, and I haven't actually asked anything about that, but so, Briar, just in a moment, I'd like to just ask you a little bit about the novel and about your association with the author and how you came to adopt this. But firstly, Ainsley, just 2 things. You're mainly a producer and you've decided to jump into direction for this. Can you firstly tell me a bit about that? But then I want you to tell me about this whole flattening the hierarchy given to us by Hollywood thing. What on earth are you talking about, and how dare you?
Oh, how dare they? Because I've worked in that structure my whole producing life, right? And I've worked with Taika. I don't believe in the auteur theory, even though Taika is a genius, but I have been there and watched how a team creates a film. And I just think that, it's like so what Nomadland, female gaze, other perspectives, marginalized voices, there's so much more to bring to the table, and I think that includes absolutely the process by which we do things. So I think that there is a kind of hierarchical structure that relies on a single person holding the vision for something, and sort of feeding that vision down to everybody. And that's not really culturally representative of how we operate in any way, shape or form, and it doesn't make the most sense to us. So, it's bloody hard because everybody has grown up in this industry in this way. And so, we're experimenting with what that looks like. I don't know exactly what it looks like, but we've got obviously some cultural touchstones that we can go, oh yeah, this is how we would normally do this outside of filmmaking. And so it's just a matter of trying stuff, to be completely honest. And I think, I've mentioned Taika. We've always been a little bit like F you to the establishment, and we're going to do it our way. So I feel like as a director, a couple of things. On Cousins, this film asked for more than one director. It asked for us to share the vision and to bring as many voices into the mix as we could. And if we had tried to do it a different way, sure, we might have made a good film, but it would have been a different film. So yeah, that's that. And I mean, I've always wanted to be a director, but I was needed as a producer, and I loved producing for Taika, and I love producing for first-time filmmakers because I love supporting writer-directors to try and find a way to, achieve what they want to say in the world with very limited skills. But I do love directing more.
Well, if the result of that unconventional process is a film like this, more power to you.
Thanks, Jim.
Briar, tell us a bit about the novel, about your association with the author, and what the adaptation process was like.
So the novel is it's a non-linear novel, as with the film, different but still non-linear. And what really struck us both about the novel is that it emulates this kind of the way that Maori tell stories. So if you go to a marae or in a meeting house, we practice it. You may have experienced this. We love to talk, and we have this practice of oratory, where people stand up and they have a point they want to make, and they jump to the past, come back to the present, jump somewhere else in the past, come back to the present. By the end of it, they've made a point about a situation, and the book kind of operates in that way.
It's an amazing book. You've got to read it.
Yeah.
And so the script emulates that, and that was one of the things that I was drawn to. But the book has many more characters and storylines, and what was interesting for me was the book was written in 1992. I was married to the novelist's son, and I would be privy to her conversations, the novelist with the director, the person then that was to direct the film, Merata Mita, who's one of our most astounding Māori women filmmakers. And I knew the problems. I never read their scripts, but I understood the problems they were having with their adaptation, because I could hear them talking while I was changing nappies and making cups of tea. And so by the time the book came into my hands, and that was after Merata Mita passed away and she was unable to get that film made, I knew that I had to be really brutal with the story and the characters. So what I did was I read it 3 times, one after the other, until I kind of held the story in my head. I kind of knew it, and I knew the moments in it that stood out for me and resonated. So I gave myself a freedom with the story because I felt I understood the spirit of it. And that was kind of how it went.
I was just going to say, Jim, because you asked about the editing, I don't know if you noticed we had 3 editors. We really did have 3 editors. Alex was our first editor and is credited as the main editor. But ever since producing with Taika, we've always used multiple editors. It's just another way that we disrupt the process, how it is. Because, and I think Briar and I, because we knew the novel and we understood and we had this commitment to the non-linear storytelling, it was really important to kind of to use more than one editor to essentially find the heartbeat of the story. One of the ways we describe Cousins is that it's cinema you feel. It's not cinema you want to think too much about. So once the editor had spent too long in the world of the film and they were coming out of their gut and into their head, we were like, okay, we need to move along now. So the editing process was awesome, actually, just because there were so many ways you could put it together. In the end, we had to keep going back to the script because the script was the most faithful to the spirit of the novel, and it actually was always, just about always, the right way to go.
Briar, you're in this film. And
Yes.
that's quite a visage that you present before the camera. Can you just tell us a bit about the transformation, what that process was like, and what it was like basically staring into a camera or slightly off camera so intensely? Just tell us a bit about that experience for you.
You mean
Turning this gorgeous thing into that old hag.
I wasn't actually going to use those words, but
that sort of thing. How was the process of your transformation from this to that?
because it's very, I mean, it's very powerful, and it sets the tone for the film. It's really just so impactful.
Oh, thank you. You know that the character firstly was supposed to be played by another actor, Nancy Brunning, who became increasingly, and she's was one of our most astounding actors, and she passed away, or she became very ill 2 weeks out of shoot. And I used to act in theatre, and that's partly why it came to be that I took that role. And I was very reluctant at first, and then Ainsley made me audition for it, and then I became very, very fierce about having that part.
Oh, I love that. So Ainsley, so she's co-directing the film. You made her audition, and you put her through the audition process.
I made her audition 4 times. Well, that's what Brian kept saying, and I was like, I don't think I did that. But then I had to reflect on it, and I was like, what the hell was I thinking? But there were a few things. It's because we had worked so hard to work out our co-directing relationship that I felt really nervous about this added dynamic where Brian would step away, and then I would just have to be on my own, and not only that, but directing my co-director.
Well,
yeah, but also the other thing was, Jim, is that I think the other thing is that the 2 women that we cast in the next level down, the adult Missy and Makarita, they didn't quite fit anymore when we cast, if we were going to cast Briar. So it meant we had to switch them 1 week out from shoot. So I think it was more just a process of getting our heads around what the F are we going to do with this situation and how are we going to make it work. But it was great casting.
And if I may say, testament to your approach to filmmaking as a producer. Pretty hard-headed, no nonsense, no nepotism approach. So kudos to you for that.
Sorry, Brian.
Now you guys
how was it?
Sorry, go on.
Oh no, just that transformation, because it was really interesting. You were just asking Briar about the transformation. I was just saying, I know that Rachel House felt really freed by being turned into an old woman. Did you find the same?
Yeah, I did. And I kind of lived with that character that I played for, years. So I felt she's got a playfulness, but I felt the weight quite easily, because she carries a weight of, looking for this lost cousin for most of her life. So, and it was easy to, my father too was an asthmatic, and I lived with a father all of my life who was always walking and wheezing. And so I sort of called on Dad, and I found that quite easy to
And
terrible.
took your breath away.
But I found that very easy to emulate, that kind of heavy feel.
Now, you guys have obviously been to Australia a number of times. I'm very keen to know what differences you have observed between Australia and New Zealand regarding First Nations people and their relationship with the wider community, and also about the state of First Nations cinema in New Zealand compared to Australia.
Yeah. Cinema, amazing First Nation cinema. We've got a massive global Indigenous filmmaking community. So we've all kind of grown up together with the likes of Warwick Thornton and Rachel Perkins and Ivan Sen and others. So I feel like we are sisters and brothers, siblings, twin siblings in that regard. I feel like our cinema is really reflective in terms of maturity and so on. Not so at a social level, unfortunately. I mean, there are plenty of issues in New Zealand, but I certainly think that the conversation that we have in New Zealand is much, much more advanced in terms of timeline than the conversations that are happening here in Australia. And to be honest, what I am really looking for, particularly bringing cousins here, is that we do focus on difference a lot as just nations, Australia and New Zealand. We focus on our rivalry. We focus on the ways that we are different, but actually amongst our Indigenous peoples and our wider communities, I actually think there's a massive desire for change and a massive desire for balance and recovery and forward moving. So I'm totally, as I say, I see the massive disparity and I see the difference, but what I'm really trying to find is the ways in which we are kin to one another.
Yeah. Briar, I mean, one of the things that an Australian certainly notices when they go to New Zealand is, I guess, just how big a part First Nations people play in just normal society. Seems to be far more integrated, far more assimilated, or whatever the term is you want to use. But there seems to be a much more advanced stage in New Zealand than in Australia. What have been your observations about Indigenous people here?
Well, it's absolutely true. We've got far more voice at home than Indigenous Australians have in their own country. New Zealand's a small country, and I guess too we have this thing with Maori. We're very vocal, and we've always been part and pushed ourselves forward in the political arena as well. So yeah, we are at least making noise, and that's there. And it's not to say we don't have our own problems, but it's very different over here. I just get quite upset when I come over here because I feel like I can't hear the voices. I can't hear the voices of the Indigenous people in the same way I can at home. But I know they're there because I work with the Indigenous filmmaking community a lot, and they're incredible stories and filmmakers, but yeah, unfortunately not listened to in the same way we are as at home.
You had your Australian premiere last night in Sydney. How did it go, and what did it tell you about the importance of your film connecting with a wide audience?
Yeah, it was amazing. It was in Campbelltown. It was actually a massive Maori, First Nation, Pacific Island kind of community. So we had the inbuilt advantage of people from home who really, really miss home. But it was awesome. It's probably one of the most excited crowds we've had. We took like 400 photos with pretty much every member of the audience. They all stayed for Q&A. And we've got a big one with the mainstream audience at D&D Newtown tonight, and that's sold out. So really looking forward to see how it plays with that wider audience. But certainly amongst the Australian community from last night, that it was just the resonance and similarities to the stories of this country that was what they found most moving and engaging.
Yeah, and they loved the one thing they talked about a lot was the scenery in the film. I think
you have to forgive people for saying that, but look, is it just when you're making a New Zealand film? I mean, everyone always say how beautiful it looks. Is it a matter of just pointing the bloody camera at the landscape, or do you have to work for that kind of beautiful look?
I mean, no, Ray worked hard. Ray is gifted. And you know what? It always feels like a bit of a criticism, right? When people say, well, it often is. Beautifully shot, guys. You know they hated the film. But in this case, I don't think that's what it was.
Okay. Now, just very quickly, this is a very hard thing to ask, but you guys are very, very well known. So well known in New Zealand. Here in Australia, not so much.
Bupkis.
Right. So what I want you to do is I want you to each give an appraisal of the other. Ainsley, I want you to give us a nutshell, give us a CV of Briar, and then Briar, I want you to do that for Ainsley, because just to look at your list of achievements, guys, and Briar, it's your Wikipedia page obviously shows what an underachiever you are. It's almost formidable. So can you just describe each other for us, just as succinctly as you can?
Succinctly.
Yeah.
Jeepers. Okay, Briar, one of the most significant New Zealand playwrights, kooky, alternative perspective of the world, loves magical realism, is quiet but fierce. I would not want to get on the wrong side of Briar. Her voice, incredibly supportive of other writers and creatives, and I think her strength is in her intuition and her her slightly off-kilter view of the world.
Well, Ainsley Gardiner is probably our most successful, I would say successful New Zealand producer, in that she's successful because of partly the projects she chooses as well. She's got huge integrity as a producer, and her big thing, which I think sometimes is to her own detriment as a creative, is to support other emerging, diverse voices. She has massive, she's a queen on set. Like, she doesn't know it. She's very understated and a little bit jokey, but no one will mess with her. She is an absolute rock. And the most astounding thing about her is her creative wisdom. So working with her as a creative is, she is one of the only person I know that will totally understand what I'm saying and tell me there's a better way. So she's a wonderful, wonderful collaborator.
Okay.
Oh, thanks, Jim. That was a lovely exercise.
Okay, just two more questions for you. Just firstly, just in general, can you guys just address this issue of what is referred to as, is it cultural appropriation? I'm not quite sure. It's a very vaguely defined term. But in terms of telling stories, do you think that there is any currency to the idea that only certain people are entitled to tell certain stories? Or do you adopt the view that as long as the story is strong, is authentic, and touches people, that anyone can tell any story? Black person can tell a white person can tell a black story, and that sort of thing. What is your view on this issue?
Yeah. Another big question, Jim. Two things. You said it, authentic. Authenticity is key. So my thing to any writer with any story is, where are you in the story? So, if you are a white person telling a black person's story or vice versa, why and where are you? And who are you to tell the story is more a question of creative integrity and authenticity. I have an overarching view that anyone should be able to tell any story that they want to, because that is the nature of storytelling. However, the second part to my answer is it's about access. That would be true if, say, for example, in New Zealand, if Maori had equal access for the equal period of time to make as many films about themselves as others have had resource time to make stories about us, then when the pendulum is swung back to the point where we've had the equal opportunity to reflect ourselves to ourselves, then sure, open slather. But that's not the case. Okay. So there's a massive pendulum swing back that has to occur before we get to a creative ground zero, where storytelling is simply about an individual's or a community's desire to express themselves through story.
Okay, Briar, for you, listen, let me re-ask the question in this way. Let me rephrase the question for you in this way. In the suburbs of Auckland, tomorrow morning, a 15-year-old white girl wakes up and has what she believes is a brilliant story about First Nations people in New Zealand. She's not related to a First Nations person. Only knows about First Nations culture from what she's seen on TV, but she has an idea for what she believes is a great story. What would be your advice to her?
I would say to her, is it your story to tell? What experiences have you got as a human, as a person, that allow you to connect to the characters in the story in a meaning and authentic way? And I'd say that she probably couldn't at 15 and being white, but she might have some cred given that she's living in South Auckland. So it's either like, it's either like what, telling the story, if you want to tell the story, what perspective can you give on that story from your knowledge base, you know?
I think it's a big cultural thing too, Jim, is because I think white people have got their own stories. I hate the term white, Australian people, New Zealand people, Dutch immigrants, Croatian migrants, whatever your heritage and background is. I just think dig a little deeper and find the story that is deeply about you and who you are and where you come from. And if it intersects with the stories of others, by all means, tell those stories and work collaboratively with those people to tell those stories. But I reckon, I think that's a little bit about privilege too. Just dig a bit deeper and find. I believe everybody has a really authentic story to tell.
Yeah, I think it's such a strange thing that people want to do that sometimes. It's like, for me, if I woke up one day and said I want to write a script about a Chinese family, it's pretty audacious, really. Like it just wouldn't occur to me.
But art is audacious, Briar, as you know. This is now
hilarious.
Part of the interview we call the Schembri Challenge. Okay? This is where I come to you as a studio head with a lot of money and a lot of power. And I put to you this scenario. Guys, you're a couple of wonderful First Nations filmmakers. You've got great credentials, and I saw your little movie. Absolutely loved it. What we'd like to do is give it a platform release across the United States and Europe. We'd like to make a deal with you. We want to give you a first look deal for your next film. The only thing we want to do with your lovely movie is we want you to re-edit it so it's chronological. Because we think that if you do that, we've got a really big chance of getting a nice big audience. As it is at the moment, you know, it might be take too much of an attention span at the moment to follow the story. So how about that? Can you recut it for us chronologically? If you can do that, we'll make a deal, give it a big release, give you a first look deal for your next film. Big Hollywood studio, what do you say?
Jim, I can do you one better than that. We've got that version. It's boring as shit. I'll send it to you. And you can decide. Would you say yes if we sent the boring version and they said, love it?
No, I would say no.
Yeah, it's boring, Jim. You would really not like it. We did it.
Okay.
Look, I'd say I'm poor as anything and I'd still say no.
Okay. Even if the studio says you might think it's boring, but sorry, go on.
Cut Briar selling out and
There's no right or wrong answer.
Jim, I'd be open because I truly believe you'd see the version and go, oh God, what were we thinking? But yeah, I'd have the conversation with Briar for sure, because actually our success is our way of expanding our community as well. Us being successful in all ways, like Taika doing his thing there and us doing our thing here, it opens doors. So I wouldn't say outright no.
Right. So you'd had that conversation with the studio head?
No, I've never had that conversation.
No, you would have.
Oh yeah, because I honestly would believe that he would see the version that I'm talking about and go, oh, I see.
Okay.